Hello, my friends, and welcome to Fishery. I'm Alexander Williamson, your host, as always, and today we're going to talk about global fish economics and why right now we are on the verge of seeing some changes that have never been seen before in the fish hobby. The world is more globalized than ever, more interconnected than ever, and when one domino falls, a lot of dominoes can fall. It's also interesting to see when companies own different parts of different processes of importing, exporting, transshipping, and breeding and farming fish, as well as retail ends of things. So, are we going to continue to see the preference being in people buying very cheap but low quality fish that are farmed, or that are wild caught and not really quarantined for long, not really not cared for in an expert way, but just kind of shoveled down the conveyor belt, economically speaking, and then split up amongst big box stores, Petco, PetSmart, wherever it may be. And likewise, we're talking globally, in places where people don't have the same money, they don't have a US dollar or a euro or a pound with the same spending power, they need to kind of continue to buy fish from those less expensive sources. So likewise, while there are inexpensive fish coming from the wild and the price can be very low there, and it's kind of exporting parties that act as middlemen that are setting the price. There's also farms, everything from a dirt hole in the ground to very, very high-tech farms that are being developed. And right now we have a landscape that is unlike any before in the hobby's history. We have a change the last 4 or 5 years that is really fascinating, and it's very chaotic. So in the 7 years that I've had this YouTube channel, how time flies, right, guys? And thank you if you've stuck with me, if you've been around a while. I appreciate it. But I do a forecast every December and every January where we recap what the popular trends in fish breeding were. What species we're selling, we're making good money, which ones are home breeders kind of keeping, and which ones are new to the hobby as far as like long fin variants or new color morphs, new species altogether. And also which countries are producing the fish. Now there's two ways to look at that, essentially. There's a lot of ways to look at it. But in economics, let's just say there's the way of looking at it as how many individual fish are being sold, and then there's the money of how much their fish are going for, right? And at the end of the day, some countries in the past have produced massive amounts of fish, like Brazil and Peru, because they're wild caught from there. And nothing competes with those massive wild caught numbers, but the people collecting make the least amount of money, and there's the most levels in the chain, essentially, from the wild to export, import, wholesale, retail, and then to the customer. And in some cases, people have decided that they want a higher quality product, that they want a fish that's been bred in captivity, that's been bred in water similar to theirs, that's been fed good food its whole life, never had parasites, never been stressed by a journey overnight other than the one it takes from whoever you're buying it from and to you. And now there is an entirely new wave of people entering this hobby. So in years past, they're really interesting, and I like to see how I did as far as forecasting what the trends will be in the next year, or which country is going to take the top spot in producing. It had never changed a whole lot in the time I've been really looking at fish keeping. So the last 20 years, really, it had not changed much. And if you look at things in a broader sense, it hadn't changed since the 1960s, or maybe you could argue the early 70s. Things have been kind of similar in where fish are coming from, who's farming a whole bunch of them, and who's farming your kind of bread and butter fish in Southeast Asia, who's wild catching those fish in South America or Southeast Asia as well. And Africa, I suppose, is also on the map there for some species. But now with the advent of nanofish and this ability of educating yourself on how to keep lots of different species that were maybe less popular before in the hobby, people are able to kind of get the fix that they've wanted, which is, you know, always wanting a new fish with a new characteristic or a rarer fish or something that's unusual, something that's eye-catching. And when you have a bunch of bright purple fish with yellow polka dots, that's incredible the first time. But 20 years down the line, you want something that is maybe black and white, like a zebra pleco, you know? So it's all a matter of taste and what people are used to seeing, and that has to be switched up, or new species have to be discovered or brought into the hobby for people to stay excited and buying traditionally. Now, we're also seeing a new wave of people buying and breeding and owning just for the sake of taking care of the species. Things like goodeids, things like species that are extinct in the wild or endangered in the wild. And this new kind of wave of conservation-minded fish keeping is actually pretty large. In recent surveys that they've done out of Dublin, there's a financier group and an insuring group and stock trading prospectus that comes out every year. There's one out of New York as well, and another out of London, one out of Tokyo, that all look at ornamental fish and then project what's going to happen. And that's a lot of times where I'm getting my numbers on, like, right now the world fish in ornamental fish economy is let me get this right, a $6.2 billion industry. Well, the prospectus forecasts right now say that 2030 will be $11 to $12 billion. So it will double in that short amount of time. In the next, say, 5 to 7 years, they're expecting the amount of fish monetarily to double. Now, does that mean the actual number of fish moving around the world will double? Probably not, and probably nowhere near it, because also there's been recent research by the University of Florida that found that the average fish keeper, when they asked westernized countries with essentially internet and Facebook, when they asked your average fish keeper in Europe, US, Korea, Japan, how many fish do you have? Do you have fish? Have you ever had fish? Well, it turns out most people have had a fish at some point in their life in a lot of Europe, and it's just under half in the US, and places like Australia, it's about a third. And when you look at that, and then you look at how many fish they keep while they're keeping fish, if they're current fish keepers, the answers are pretty interesting in that 10% of people currently keeping fish had 10 or more tanks, whereas 90% had 2 or 3 or less than 3 tanks in their care. So what that tells you is that there are people who are crazy like me, maybe you, who love fish and want species tanks, want a blackwater tank, want a want a biome tank from this part of the world and another tank from that part of the world, working on breeding lines and shrimp and this and that. That has become a lot more of a reality than in the past, when that was kind of reserved for having a little more money. These goods, whether it's the cost of glass or it's the cost of the actual fish themselves, it's become much more affordable, even though I know it seems expensive. At the end of the day, it's a discretionary good, and it's a thing that is a luxury. We do not need to have these ornamental fish. Arguably, I might be starting trouble with some of you here, but we do not need to have them to survive by any means. And so this economy can be really fickle. And we expected during the lockdowns and the pandemic that happened around the world, a lot of people thought that the economy of fish keeping was going to be ruined. And it did disrupt shipping and who was the top dog. and the kind of fish being sold, because air freight got so expensive that it didn't make sense to ship out the cheap fish at the very bottom of the barrel. Those fish, they were sold locally in Southeast Asia or locally to South America, Africa, but they were not being exported in the numbers to other places. And that's when we started to see a rise in the number of fancy fish, or you could argue mutants, that we've line bred. So things like high-end guppies, bettas, wild bettas, particular wild species that weren't necessarily popular in the past and that are sometimes a little harder to find, have become a popular thing in themselves amongst that 10% of people who keeps 90% of the fish being sold. And those same people also report, 60% of them, that they have taken fish that have reproduced in their care and either given, bought, or sold, some part of that transaction, homegrown fish. And to me, that's kind of inspiring, and to hear that we have the conservation side of things, where plecos and goodeids and fish from around the world that are going extinct or that are threatened might be saved by kind of an arc of aquarists. That's really cool. But I wanted to touch on the chaos part, which is how we thought maybe the economy was about to implode on the fish hobby. And really, it became the best 4 years we've ever seen in the fish hobby in America or globally. And now there is getting to be kind of a cutthroat competition for who can raise these higher priced fish. And traditionally, the highest priced fish, other than, say, maybe an arowana or a very specialized gold or platinum morph of, some sort of Biochar or something like that, would be koi and goldfish that are very high-end out of Japan. And now we're seeing countries like Israel starting to start breeding, or people within Israel, I should say. Well, Israel's got its own issues going on right now, so who knows how stable that is. But also we see places like the Czech Republic. They have been known for breeding angelfish and, German blue rams and all sorts of cichlids and African cichlids, West African cichlids and Rift Lake cichlids, as well as South American and then human hybrids and select lines that have, long fin morphs or a certain color morph or a collection point that is being kept true, and that people are willing to pay a whole lot more for than the stuff that gets mass farmed outdoors in Southeast Asia or in Florida, even, for that matter. And Florida, which used to have 700 fish farms in it and supply a lot of the U.S., now it has only 106 licensed big fish farms, and they're going out of business every day. Land is being sold off to developers, and it's just, there isn't that much profit margin in it unless they kind of bring their operation indoors, or they can keep it massive and breed, guppies for a penny a piece, and then that can be sold for $1 a piece once it goes down the chain or whatever, But it is not a penny to raise a guppy anymore, even outdoors and in a pond. It is, 20 or 30 cents or whatever it may be. So now a lot of the breeders are also trying to specifically take care of fish that are a little more niche, like the Europeans have. And what's interesting is the top spot that every year we go over in my prospectus of the hobby and the economics of fish keeping. Right now, it's anyone's game for where that will be in 5 years. But where that's going to be even next year is up in the air. We're starting to see a bunch of different countries coming down into even playing fields. So historically, it's always gone, Japan or Singapore, then maybe Indonesia in the last 10, 20 years, Indonesia or Malaysia, and you see sometimes Vietnam or Thailand in there too. And then usually number 4 or 5 is going to be the Czech Republic, and then Brazil, Peru, going to be from a sheer number of just wild species caught. And in the amount of money coming out, that's what's really interesting too, is that the money is so much lower for where the fish are being wild caught. Whether that's Papua New Guinea or that's Peru or, Colombia, people are getting paid such little amount of money wholesale. Zebra plecos are going for maybe $6 to $8 for an adult fish, US, in Brazil. But now with global trade, air freight overnight can get you that pleco into the US. And what's it worth if you can flip it directly to a retailer that's willing to pay $100 or $200 for that fish, versus if it has to go through a wholesaler, maybe a local distribution person, and then to a local fish store. Now people are really trying to kind of avoid that whole chain and make the big money themselves. But indigenous and or developing nations and folks that are still living on these rivers and collecting these fish for foreign or sometimes they're not foreign, but a lot of them tend to be, like in South America, there's a lot of European and American people that are acting as the exporters, that are down there and they have a facility where they quarantine the fish or they acclimate the fish and then they ship them out. And the care that the fish receive varies really widely, as does it the quality of fish that are bred on farms, whether they're culling the ones that are deformed or whether they're looking for health and vitality and lifespan and fertility as markers of a good fish, versus whether they just want it to be the brightest, most colorful with the craziest fins. And the way you treat those and the way that is set up in mass production can be kind of different. But what's going on right now is we're seeing governments like India, like Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Laos, that all are pushing initiatives for farmers to be breeding fish. And likewise, at the same time, we're seeing that the Netherlands, the Dutch, are the 4th or 5th biggest producer of fish money-wise right now, globally, which came out of nowhere. The Czechs fell to 9th place this year. And, now we've got the war in Ukraine. Ukraine was another European country that had a lot of good fish. So does Poland. And now we've got a whole other situation going on with those places. Who knows what will go on there in the next 4 years, too, if the tension in the region continues. So I just wanted to bring this up because I think people should be aware. You've got places like Colombia and Brazil that are worried about overfishing in the wild stock, and they're trying to figure out how to start breeding on farms their native fish and using that as a sustainable export, which I think is the way to go. But as they do that, the price increases on those fish because they're not just being raised by nature. And then the black market is also seeing an increase in poaching because those fish are costing more. And so when you go get them from the wild, you're going to want to try to go get the fish that's hardest to raise in captivity because that'll be the most expensive. And in the wild, that may not mean anything. So now we're seeing things like 100,000 zebra plecos a year leaving Brazil when it was illegal. So Brazil is now rethinking that, and they've gone from a negative or gone from a positive list where they only had a list of fish you could export to a negative list, which is the ones you can't, which opens it up a whole lot more. Now new species or species that we just don't know the status of will be able to be in play a lot more. But you also have countries like Colombia that are so sick of the poaching and things going on that they shut down the whole harvesting industry for several months a year. And this year, this time of year, they actually shut it down for the first time ever. They said no exports or imports or anything, just no ornamental fish going on. Now, there's ways around that, apparently. Did talk to a couple transshippers that are kind of circumnavigating that by going through Peru and other places. But in the meantime, they will start up their fishery again later in the year, and that's a fairly normal thing. But we're starting to see these initiatives take place, and we're starting to see in India there are 2,500 ornamental fish farms in northern and central India. Well, now the government's offering a 45% subsidy for anybody who wants to get into the business. So they want them to stop collecting wild fish quite as much, collect their brood stock, and then start breeding those fish in captivity wherever possible. And they think that they can become the top dog. So now we've talked about Israel, we've talked about all that going on, and we talk about Israel growing goldfish and koi out in the desert in the Middle East. Well, now it turns out that China is putting sanctions on Japan, and it's trying to bolster its own economy of raising koi, carp, and fancy fish. And they want Chinese bred koi to become a new gold standard, which probably won't ever quite work. But it may mean that the main purchaser, over 25% of the koi that gets sold from Japan, go to China that are exported. And so the fact that that could be disrupted could be devastating to the Japanese breeders and farms. So it remains to be seen what's going to happen. Are they going to shift to maybe Medaka, rice fish, or guppies, or, I mean, maybe to shrimp keeping? That's a lot of money in a little creature. And that's where you see places like Taiwan doing that, or Hong Kong even. Singapore, for that matter, is a city that is a country, and yet they rank in the top 2 always of producers of fish the last few decades. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens and where the new waypoints are for wholesale and kind of who is the center of the trade. You know, it's been Singapore, it's been Bangkok, Tokyo, it's been Hong Kong and the Netherlands, Amsterdam, for instance. And now we're in LA, New York, Tampa, Miami. And now it's going to be interesting to see if that stays the same, especially as even in the U.S., we see that the old style farms that there were 700 plus of with licenses to breed fish ornamentally in Florida in the 60s, there are now 106 of those farms left, and they're getting more and more consolidated as we speak. So I just wanted to kind of bring this all up with you guys, see what you have to say about it. If you're from another country and you know that you guys are breeding fish and producing some quality X, Y, or Z, I'd love to hear what you guys are seeing being bred domestically. If you guys think that, you know, breeders are going to develop something that fish keepers might actually take over the whole industry someday when the internet, you know, things like, I mean, the equivalent of eBay or what Vivi tried to do, and now Vivi is defunct, no longer exists. But will there be a website or something like that where people can buy, sell, and trade directly, thus saving money and also having more access to anything than ever before? You know, we'll always need those wild collectors if that's the case, but do we need those big industrial farms for bread and butter fish? Will we need as many of those? Will people still want those fish? All interesting things to think about. So I hope you guys have a great day. And I wanted to get this kind of old school video without all the bells and whistles of editing out. And I hope that it was watchable, even though you had to stare at me the whole time. But I am working on a video for you guys, hopefully tomorrow. I was hoping it was today. I was hoping it was the day before that. But finding good footage to edit in has been a bit of a challenge. And so I'm working on that on the channel. So please bear with me, and hopefully we'll continue to improve things on the channel, continue to be curious, and bring you the news of the hobby and the science and the wonders and the beauty of the hobby. I'll talk to you guys later. Take care, and thank you again for your likes, subscribing, and becoming members. It's only $1.99. It's appreciated so much. And also, we should be firing up a Discord server very soon. I'm just going to tease you with that. All right, guys, take care.